Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of Play by Ear. My name is Aryan, and today I'm joined with Namitha
Hi everyone.
and Ayat.
Hi.
And today we'll be talking about genetics, gene edited babies, CRISPR, and one article that we've all read about a genetic scandal that happened in the last few years, in which a scientist named Jiankui and his research led to his doom. So I think before we go into the conversation, we should talk about what CRISPR is and what the genetic stuff. We're going to be saying what it means. So, um, Ayat, do you want to start talking about that?
Okay. So essentially, human gene editing, or as you said, designer babies, is a technique that allows scientists to, change an organism's DNA. And in this scenario, he used the CRISPR-Cas9 methodology. And so CRISPR basically is a repeating DNA structure in a bacteria, and the bacteria use this to defend themselves against viruses. And so when a virus invades the bacteria can cut up the virus's DNA and store sections of that DNA in the bacteria's DNA, and they can use this with the Cas9 enzyme. So Cas9 is an enzyme. They can use this to protect themselves against it and form thing like more enzymes that destroy this part of the DNA. So if the virus were to invade the bacteria again, they'd have some sort of resistance against it. And scientists have figured out a way to almost insert our own DNA. So they've designed their own sections of DNA and RNA, and they're able to insert this into the polypeptide chain and alter the genome of the organism that they're targeting. And so this basically changes the cell line of an organism completely. And so in this particular case, he cut out the section of a gene called, so the gene is called a CCR5 gene, and he cut out a section in 31 embryos. The section was what was it called? It was the delta 32, and this part of the gene corresponded to immunity or protection. It gave the owner protection to certain strains of HIV, and so he cut this out and replaced it with one that he designed that's similar to delta 32 but not identical. And he did this to 31 embryos, and only 19 were deemed normal, and he implanted 2, and that's where the twins Lulu and Nana came from. Yeah.
I think that's a good summary. Yeah. So
Mm.
there's a lot of ethical issues that we can cover when it comes to this topic in itself. But I think the first thing before we go into the bioethics of what was wrong with his implantation methods and whatnot is the actual scientific principle of his research and what he did and what outraged the whole genetics community in terms of his research. So here's a question for all of you. Do you think his CRISPR edited babies were scientifically appropriate?
You want to go?
Scientifically, I would say that the first thing he should have sort of addressed is whether there was an actual need for this to take place. Is that what you're asking in terms of its?
Yeah, I mean, we know what science is. Science is essentially the idea of using evidence and applying the evidence we get from clinical trials and studies into our everyday knowledge and thought to develop new technologies. So what I'm asking is, was his
Ah,
scientific abilities, what he did in terms of research, was that right from what we know what research should be done like?
okay, yeah. So in terms of the publication and his research that was carried out, its validity is definitely questioned because as we read in this article, it was not peer reviewed and it was not approved by the ethics board. And these are two things that you definitely need in order to carry out that research. So the whole method by which he carried out his project is unethical in some sense, as he did not seek approval from other member boards and he did not have that sort of justification. So the means of him even carrying it out is unjustified, and there was no other project that we'd ever seen like this before. So he wasn't really leading off of someone else's project. It was not backed up by any previous evidence. So I think that the reasons I've just stated would definitely lead to many problems in his method of carrying it out, and we've definitely seen that in the results, I would say. So wasn't exactly appropriate for those reasons.
Yeah, I think also, from a scientific point of view, he claimed to have completely induced the mutation in one of the twins, and for them to be able to properly test this out, they would have to kind of destroy the blastocyte, which is what the embryo is 5 to 9 days after fertilization, and he'd have to inject something and test all of the cells in the blastocyte to see if they all had the mutation. But obviously he didn't do this because one was this embryo was implanted into the mother, and so it's like you don't know if it would actually qualify and if the mutation actually does exist in all of their cells. And I watched this video, and I think Arian's going to link it, and it explains more about this. But essentially, this could mean that both twins have something called mosaicism, which means that the mutation is only induced in a few of their cells, and you don't know no one really knows. No one's really done the research into what effects this could have on the children in the future. So it could potentially have really dangerous results, and you just don't know because it's unstudied. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I think I heard that somewhere, which another geneticist was pointing out that his research in itself was incorrect, and like what he was doing with his own genetically modified replacement for the delta gene in itself was non-functional, so there was no point of him actually doing so. And we'll touch on that later, but I wanted to talk about quickly the methods he used for getting his research out there, which I think is quite unscrupulous for a actual scientific person in the field. What he did was he went behind the whole university's back to use their their CRISPR devices, and also his actual way of obtaining blood samples and whatnot was completely unethical. So I think we can go into the bioethics of it now. So now, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so something that I read, which I found extremely shocking, was that basically, in order to carry out this CRISPR technique, you cannot be HIV positive. And the main issue here was that the parents concerned, one of them was HIV positive. And to sort of bypass that, he switched the blood samples and used another blood sample in order for this technique to be allowed to happen. And obviously that's not appropriate, and that's one of the bioethics that we've studied, is that it's completely sort of destroyed the accuracy of this treatment in the first place if you're not even using the correct blood samples from the patients that are of concern. And so if that leads itself to all sorts of sort of confidentiality issues as well. And I think that was one of the main things I was really shocked to hear about in terms of how he carried out this process. I was wondering if you guys had any other points about bioethics that you studied.
Yeah, something I wanted to touch on a second ago was the idea of whether, we mentioned it, whether his actual research was needed. So he was trying to make HIV resistant babies, which made no sense because the Cas9 gene or something like that was has been researched on before, and there are drugs in place which block that specific CCR5 gene, which makes me wonder why exactly were the scientific community outraged by the fact that he tried to introduce resistance to a disease in the first place? So, why is resistance to disease a bad thing, do you think?
I think touching on what you just said earlier,
Hmm.
the fact that because the parents were doing it, that were trying to conceive a child from IVF anyway, um, they could have done other forms of screening, genetic screening that we've already established and quite a popular thing to do to see if the offspring would have HIV or
Mm.
not. So yeah, there actually was no medical need
Hmm.
um, for his treatment in the first place, because you could have seen if the embryos were HIV positive or not, and it kind of, it makes you think if people who are HIV positive, you can't do the genetic editing on them.
Hmm.
Why is that? Why? And he did it anyway. Why can't you do it on them? And what knock-on effect would that have on the tools or the equipment that they use for the next set of research?
Hmm.
And yeah, all in all, it's just a really unethical scenario. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in medicine in general, something that they always try and evaluate is like clinical need. And when you are deciding to treat someone, you sort of go through the process of how can we start from the most like minimally invasive and most valid or accurate form of treatment. And instead of going through that route, he immediately jumped to an untested extreme form of treatment. And that was something that didn't exactly seem necessary. Like you guys said, it's not meeting the clinical need. An interesting conversation that we had earlier was he's he's not a doctor, he's a scientist, he's a researcher. So does he have that same responsibility to go about a method of treatment as doctors do and go through that whole process of ethical guidelines and approaching it in the same sense as a doctor would? Does he have that same responsibility
Hmm.
if he's not a doctor technically? So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think what s- distinguishes medicine and scientific research in itself is that medicine only has like direct interaction with patients with ailing needs, but otherwise, I think these two fields are practically inseparable. They must have some form of evidence-based approach, systematic reviews, and looking through data and scientific principles in a quite a critical manner and before they are implemented into the general public. So I think because of this actual issue itself, it had an interaction with patients who specifically wanted their kids to definitely be HIV negative, and they had those concerns in for what they were going in for. I think they definitely had the ethical responsibility to make sure whatever they were doing was just and reviewed by everyone in the community by itself. I think I read an interesting viewpoint which said the quote was, "You can't get validation from your closest friends. You have to get validation from every single person in the community before you do something like that," which I think
Mm.
was definitely a good summary for what was bad about what the research article did uh,
Mm.
in the end. Yeah, I think I think that's something we can lead on to when it comes to actual genetic sequencing and what patients really want. So here's a question for you guys. Would you get yourselves genomically sequenced at a hospital to check if you had any predisposition to any disease in the future?
Okay, well, I personally would, because it can help you, decide if you want to have kids and how that's going to affect your life in the future and just your life in general and your career prospects. But I know a few people. So I think my teacher's friend, he sorry, she doesn't want to get tested to see if she has these genetic disorders because they occur in her family for generations, and she doesn't want to get tested because she doesn't want this to kind of stop her. So
Mm.
you can see how some people might think that's kind of a selfish point of view, because you could be potentially harming your future children, and they could have really harmful genetic disorders because of this. But yeah, I think it's quite a difficult thing to navigate, and it's quite person to person. But personally, I would test for it.
I guess
Mm.
I guess for me, I definitely wouldn't. I would look at us contrasting about this issue, but
Hmm.
I wouldn't because I don't want to live my life in the idea that, oh, at 70 I will get Alzheimer's or I will have these things that I cannot control. Yeah, to some extent we can control them through our diet and what we're doing, but I don't want to live my life in some kind of fear that I'm going to die because of this disease in the future that is because of my genetics. And I don't want
Mm.
to prevent myself from doing things that I might enjoy in the future because of that idea that I might, I might something bad might happen to me in the future, because I personally have that philosophy that my life should be the way I want to live it, not restricted by
Mm.
what people tell me that. Yeah, obviously it's advisory,
Hmm.
so I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I could definitely see the advantage of it in terms of you wouldn't want to pass on a sort of disadvantaged gene to your future children. And I think that would be the one thing that would incline me to get my genome screened. But on the other hand, like you said, I wouldn't want that feeling of it is selfish in some sense, but also it's for your own personal, like, a peace of mind, is that you don't want the guilt or the constant like worrying and being cautious of your life because you know that something's coming. And it's sort of that thing about you would never want to look into the future
Hmm.
to see what would happen because it would change the way you are now. And yeah, that's something. It is a personal thing. At the same time, it could be seen as selfish. And I'd say the only reason I would be for like future children. But apart from that, for myself, I would rather not, just for my own sort of peace of mind.
Hmm.
um yeah, I
I
think
don't know.
it's a
I
touchy
don't.
subject.
Yeah, I don't really see it like how you guys see it. I see it more that if you knew that potentially you could have a certain disease in the future, that would kind of motivate you to do what you want now, and um yeah, it's motivation to like kind of live in the moment more because. But I
Mm.
do see where you're coming from. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think that's a philosophy that people should sort of live by anyway. Like, it is difficult, but just try and do what makes you happy in the moment and sort of be present as a person. That's sort of whether or not you have a condition that is going to be debilitating in the future. You should technically have that mentality throughout your life. That's the best way, I think. But yeah, definitely knowing what happens in the future would sort of, it would shift that. It would either make you think, oh, I have to
Yeah,
live every moment now, or you'd constantly just be worrying.
but yeah,
So
you'd
it's
get
like
like a
it
shift in a
depends.
mindset. Yeah, like you
Yeah.
said.
Either way,
Hmm.
it would shift it.
Hmm. Really interesting.
Anyway,
Mm.
okay, let's touch on that a little bit. When we come for genetic screenings through the NHS, that's something that we've been able to do because of the Human Genome Project. However, I was thinking about this. What if someone wanted to get a genetic screen, but obviously wouldn't be referred by a geneticist in the hospital? So I was thinking, like we have for organs nowadays, there is
Mhm.
definitely a black market for organs, in which people can go to the black market and retrieve organs if the waiting lists are too long, which is completely illegal, but still people manage to get away with it. Which makes me think, can there be a place in the black market for genetic engineering and unsupervised CRISPR to lead to like people having their own uh, babies with their with their needs and whatever they wanted to fulfill through CRISPR, done illegally in some area? Like, do you think what do you think could happen with this?
I think so. like we've already seen, there are forms of like ethical misconduct in genetic engineering, and this can happen, and that's something that we're already very aware of. And I believe that if the NHS were to adopt this form of treatment more frequently, and make it a sort of a built, like a core part of genetics and genetic screening, then I'm sure that they would come up with ethical guidelines alongside that, because the medical field is constantly evaluating with new forms of treatment how we can apply our current ethical guidelines, and then also come up with new ones to sort of constantly adapt. But if you think about it in terms where it's not supervised, it's not being peer reviewed, it's not being, it's not being approved by anyone, then it leads to all sorts of things going wrong in terms of it will just lose control. And I think that's where it leads on to the whole aspect of designer babies, is that where is the medical need for you to be changing genetics in terms of eye color, in terms of hair color, just to make them your preference? That's if it's unsupervised, that's where we would lose control, and designer babies would become a possibility. Yeah, that's what I kind of have to say about that. What do you think of the black market in genetic engineering?
Oh, I feel like there's, compared to say organ donation, I think there's slightly less of a demand, because it's less life or death. And I think I don't know if this is true, but I know in other countries it's more widely available. So I think in the Gulf it's more widely available to have designer babies. And so yeah, I think there'd be less of a demand for you to go through the black market to do this. But eventually, when people I don't know if I should say this, but when people get more, I don't know, bored, maybe they might want to do it. If that makes sense. Like when society itself gets a bit bored of natural ways to do things.
Yeah, exactly. As it becomes more of a common and frequent thing to happen, people will become more aware of it, and people will then start to request for it. And now, if the NHS, fully following their guidelines, were to deny people from having this form of therapy simply because it's not necessary, then that would lead to sort of the attitude of, rebelling against what the doctors are saying and still finding your own means. And if that is available, that would be the reason for people to go and have it done, unsupervised or in the black market, as we're sort of phrasing it. So I think, like Ayat said, if people becoming bored of it and it's just become the normal, it would make more people aware of it, more people would go for it, and then that's when we'd see, people getting denied and then trying to figure out another way to have it. And that's why, it's just people's attitudes towards it. That would be the reason that it would occur.
I think we've touched on an important point here, like with people's attitudes and when it comes to designer babies in itself, because it makes me think about what the ideal person would be in some prospect. What would people actually suggest? Like, we're talking about hair color and eye color, but why does it stop there? Why can't we go for babies who have more inclined personality traits that allow them to have sufficient problem solving or high leadership skills? Some things that we think that are developed through our environment could be changed by genetics in its own way. So that's when we go into things like Darwin's theory of evolution, when it comes to the passing of advantageous genes and kind of survival of the fittest. So obviously we're evolving. We will be evolving in the future. Does this mean whatever genetic engineering CRISPR is giving to us, is that speeding up evolution, or is that slowing it down?
I think it's like a different thing completely. It's because you're introducing genetically engineered genes that from what the researchers find are supposed to give an advantage, but you don't know how or if even that's going to affect other parts of the person's lifestyle or just their body and how it works in general. And so I think it's difficult, but if you could say it kind of is slowing down natural selection because more people being able to resist certain diseases.
Exactly, yeah.
But then you could kind of say it's speeding it up because it's like the it doesn't have to go through what would naturally happen, and you're just speeding up the adaptation of an organism.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because it's designed by humans, you don't know how foolproof it is compared to the natural way that that it works.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much. I don't know about evolution. Like I had said, it could go either way, but we are definitely going sort of against natural selection because this is being like our genetics are at some point. Well, if this progresses further, it's going to be artificially selected, and we're therefore getting rid of the whole process of the people that have the disadvantageous gene. Sort of it will slowly die out and then the advantageous gene is passed on. That's how natural selection works. But if we're now giving everyone the advantageous gene, it will lead to overpopulation. It will lead to, of course, it will have longevity of life, but then what other conditions could occur if people are living for longer? And that's what we're already seeing because, with preventative treatments and everything, we're seeing people living for longer, but we are yet to know the negative effects of that. And there could be so many. And one of the particular things I would say is sort of allocating of resources in the world. As we have more and more people in the world, is that something we can cope with?
Yeah, I think the world's already under a lot of strain, and to increase this it's not something that should be our aim. And what should humans be living any longer than they already are? Yeah, because of overpopulation, because of the increased life expectancy, we're already seeing negative effects. And so, do we actually want to make the life expectancy even longer? But yeah.
Yeah, because I think I was discussing with Arian earlier. In some ways, this would reduce the pressure on the NHS if we somehow find a way to, get rid of certain diseases that, especially at older ages, put a lot of pressure on the NHS. But then at the same time, how do we know that this is not going to create new, areas of health conditions or new mutations that occur? And again, going back to the whole CRISPR scandal that we're talking about right now, we are not going to be able to sort of evaluate the progression of this disease in these children. Now, could this mutation then further mutate again once it's passed on to once the twins have children? Could this then happen again and again? We don't know the effects of that, and that's something we're going to have to be very careful with. And again, it will, go against natural selection.
Wait, why can't we know the effects of it? What's preventing us from talking to them and wondering?
Well, as we've read this case, so in order to protect the sort of dignity of these two twins, their identity has not been revealed. We don't know who these parents are, although it's been a massive public, conversation. The actual people involved are now sort of their identity is hidden. At the same time, I think the scientist, he has been jailed and he's also been, sort of banned from conducting clinical trials and scientific trials. So he will no longer be able to progress with this research. So it's hit a stop point. And like Ayat said, it will lead to copycats, and maybe we can sort of have further evaluation of those cases. But as far as this one goes, it's kind of led to a dead end. And that's why it is a matter of concern for those particular twins. Yeah.
Yeah, and because especially people have seen the publicity that comes with this scandal, and so it really does open the door to copycats because you haven't seen the negative effects because their identity is hidden, and so because I think China's said that we're not able to follow them up on it, and so you really don't know what's happening with the twins, and so kind of why wouldn't someone want to do it again, if you know what I mean?
Hmm.
You know what? I think that's a really good place to leave it. We've gone through the whole article. We talked about everything around it, and now we've talked about what's happened after the article. So I think this is a good place to leave it. So what do you have anything else you want to add, guys, to the conversation? Do you think? No? Okay.
I would just say that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I would just say that we have also seen alternatives. Like I definitely read that, the whole aim of this treatment was to block the CCR5 uh, gene,
Hmm.
and that has been tested and done with several other drugs. So I think what we've sort of learned from this is that yes, we do obviously promote research, but it has to be done through a very tedious but completely worthwhile process. So that's something that we've learned from this scandal, I guess, is that you can't really bypass or leapfrog in in scientific research, and it may take years and months, but that's what's important to avoid cases like this happening again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Yeah, research is very important for how we shape the future of the world, and
Hmm.
I think cases like this show us how much we scrutinize the scientific community because we know the effects of what their research is going to be on the whole population itself.
Frozen.
I think Arian is cut out for a second.
Wait, I'm okay. And then yeah,
I don't know if he knows.
I think that's them. Anyway,
Anyway, we'll wait for him to come back. But I guess the point he's trying to make is that research is obviously going to be so. Oh yeah, he's back. He's back. There we go.
yeah,
You can carry on with your point now.
I was fine the whole
You
time.
cut out for a long time.
It's off my PC, so everything I heard, everyone else heard, so it's fine.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So I think we can end this episode here. So thank you for listening to episode 3 of Play It by Ear, and hope to see you again soon. We'll be releasing the episode 4 very soon, and please be tuned in for that. Anything else you guys want to say before we end?
I guess just remind people if they've watched our first 2 episodes to rate the podcast on Spotify, because you can do that now.
Links will
I haven't
be
figured out.
links will be on the website as usual and down below. And make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and leave a comment if you have any conflicting opinions or something that you want us to address in our next podcast. We can definitely do so. That's why we do these things, to interact with you guys. So thank you again, and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.